Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode number 42, Future of Web Development. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Mike Karan. And in this episode, we're going to be going through our weekly pain points, as well as segment number 1, which is industry trends in 2019, segment number 2, which is our predictions, and then a web news that's sure to spark up a conversation. Are we too focused on conversions? But before we jump right into the episode, I just wanted to mention once again that we do have a brand new Discord server launched approximately a week ago. So there'll be a link in the full version of the show notes on the website. Make sure you check that out if you want to join our community. It's going quite well so far. So let's kick it off with Mike's pain points for the week.
Yeah, so speaking of the website, my pain point of the week was the HTMLallthethings.com website. So the issue that we were having was we weren't being indexed by Google, and we're kind of new to like static or production Vue.js websites. So SEO optimization, making sure that everything is correct, and then also on the server side, there was a lot of setup that needed to be done to make sure that SSL was working across all domains for HTML all the things. So that was a big pain point this week. Matt and I probably spent 4 or 5 hours on a call at one point, just going through different methods of trying to do it. And eventually I think we got it going. And we've been indexed by Google, so you can go ahead and search HTML, all the things on Google, and you will find us, or you should find us in the top 3. If you don't, let us know. Best way to let us know actually is to join our Discord, because we have some great conversations in there, and we've had a lot of people helping us out on checking if we're indexed or not. So yeah, let us know when you can join our Discord. Let's have a chat. What's your weekly pain point, Matt?
So my weekly pain point this week is in preparation for a new series that I'm coming up with. So it's going to be regarding Tailwind CSS. So I haven't used Tailwind very much, and as a result, I wanted to go install it. And the series I want to do is sort of a real basic tutorial of using Tailwind CSS sort of by itself. Making a website with that, or making a UI with that, and to be more specific. And then I wanted to eventually kind of graduate into using Tailwind with Vue, and that would be kind of like the end of our intro series, and I would maybe continue with that going forward, depending on how much different it is with Vue and all that kind of thing. I haven't looked into it yet, so we'll get there. But the big thing was Tailwind CSS is sort of really tailored toward having a full quote-unquote build procedure, so having something that compiles it and that type of thing, and I obviously didn't have that at the moment because I was just wanting to use Tailwind CSS. So one little tiny thing then is Bootstrap is a little bit, in my opinion, easier to install without having to compile it. You can use a CDN with Tailwinds, but it does limit some features that I wanted to touch on. But all is well now. I got it working, and everything should be fine. And I had a couple of Git problems. That's fixed, and I think we're good to go for the actual series. So I could start working on that, and already have started working on that. So expect some more written pieces on that coming very soon. So I'm going to go ahead now, and this is a Mike-heavy episode, so I'm going to throw it back to Mike for segment number 1.
All right, so segment number 1, industry trends in 2019. So pretty much this segment will be taking a look. It's not my industry trends, the ones that I'm seeing fully, because that's going to be the next segment, is going to be kind of our predictions for the future of web development. But this segment, I've kind of gone through a couple different sources. I've gone through quite a few, actually, and I narrowed down to a couple sources that I really liked. The 2 websites are actually codingdojo.com and then keycdn.com, and the links to the actual trends that they're pointing out will be in the show notes on our website, so you can check those out. But essentially, I've gone through them. I've kind of digested those trends that they're talking about, and I'll be just touching on each trend and letting you know how I see it going forward in the future. So first trend, let's just get this going, is progressive web apps, and I think that this is dead on. They've definitely been on the rise heavily. I've started using them in production work environments. Now, bear in mind that it's a temporary solution currently to our production work environment. We will have a more native application in the future, but it's a great, and I mean amazing way to do a quick a quick iteration process on an application, especially if you don't need any sort of like serious native features. That's if you're working with iOS, obviously, because we know that if you're only working with Android and you need native features, really a PWA can do everything for you almost. But if you're cross-platform, you kind of have to limit yourself to some very basic features. But if you only need those features and you want to iterate quickly without having to deal with any sort of store or any sort of install process and stuff like that, PWAs are a great way to go. You can send out updates on the fly. It updates really quickly, and you can get feedback really well from the people using it and quickly update as you go. So really recommend checking out Progressive Web Apps. We have a episode on them. Maybe we'll actually also link that episode in the show notes as well, so you can check that out. It'll be more in depth on what Progressive Web Apps are. I don't want to get too in depth, just not to repeat myself. The next trend that these people are seeing is cross-platform applications. And again, this kind of is a lead from the Progressive Web Apps, and I also am I agree with this one as well. Cross-platform apps are very much going up or on the rise in 2019, and I think will continue going up for a significant amount of time. I wouldn't say forever, but for now, it's definitely a very trendy way of coding, because with small teams, you can develop a application for iOS, Android, and the web at the same time, as well as some other less used application process. Like a desktop application, you can do that as well. So it's a really, really good way for a startup to get something out there. Again, it might not be a permanent solution, but as a first offering, it's great, because really web apps can do almost everything. The only thing that they struggle on a little bit is the fact that they're single threaded for the most part. You can use service workers to kind of alleviate that, but for the most part, you have to stick with a single thread, and therefore there could be some chunky operation on some lower end devices. So if you're coding for all the devices and you have a lot of animations, a lot of UI navigation, a lot of multimedia in your application, you can see a significant difference between native applications, which can use multiple cores and they're a lot more optimized for the metal of the actual device, than a web application which has to go through a couple of different rendering engines and a web view kind of to slow it down a little bit. So that's the only kind of drawback to cross-platform development. And there's different kinds of ways to do it. React Native. I talked a little bit about Flutter last week, so you can take a look at that. And Vue Native is coming up now. So and also Cordova, which is something we use heavily. So plenty of ways to do cross-platform web apps. More ways are coming up, more and more. So therefore, it's definitely a trend in 2019, in my opinion. AI and chatbots is the next one. This one I am sort of on the fence about. Like I've seen a lot of articles talking about AI and chatbots, and I have seen websites start using them. So like this refers to that when you get to a website, it automatically pops up with a little chat at the bottom. And you just see people, like you see someone like a random name talking to you, asking you if you need any help with the website. And I can see this being a great way for like a small business to be able to add that personal touch to their website. But it's a tough one. It's a tough one to kind of digest. I'm not too sure.
I have like a bit of an opinion on this particular one, and it's more of a question, I guess it is this adding to the onslaught of all the pop-ups and all the different things that people will see when they're new viewers or new visitors of a website, especially if it's their first visit? So, other things would be obviously like notification pop-up, asking, can we send you notifications, a newsletter sign-up thing coming up. Of course, if there's a cookie policy thing that needs to be dealt with, and then now we also have this chat thing coming up. I mean, I do appreciate chat apps, especially on things like Discord and that type of thing, because it's more like, you just tell the bot to do something and it does something, changes your color of your name or whatever it does. The bot can handle that, and that should be, automated, and it shouldn't really be done by a person these days. But when it comes to going to these websites, I don't know whether this is a place where I would agree them fitting in. And this actually does tie into the web news quite a bit. And these bots or these chat windows, whatever, they do create conversions, but are they positive enough? Like, is there a positive enough effect on the conversions for them to be worth it? Because I'm wondering whether a lot of people, like I think a lot of people who are not tech savvy, who maybe don't use the web all that much, are kind of semi-annoyed by these pop-ups and that type of thing, like, all the stuff that I just listed. they're probably a little bit annoyed, but at the same time, there's probably, or at least I'm annoyed at the fact that I'm on the web all the time, for work and everything else. And of course, it's like every time you go to a new website, you're just looking up like the problem for something. And it's like, or you're looking up just the price. Like you just want to grab a price for a client from a website. And of course they have to message you, 4 or 5 times, or not message you, but 4 or 5 things have to pop up. And to me, that gets annoying. And I don't know whether it will actually turn some conversions away. Like, oh, I'm willing to pay that price, but this is a pain in the ass. I don't want to do this now. I don't know what the numbers are on that, but I would say that this is going to be one of those trends that maybe goes by the wayside and maybe converts itself more into there being a chat bubble, because people are starting to get used to the little chat bubble where the bot kind of pops up, and then having that chat bubble just be present and people are like aware of what it is. It doesn't really like pop up in your face. It doesn't open a chat for you. And maybe that'll be how it goes ahead. I think that maybe that won't really take off in 2019, maybe more 2020. And it's just a complete prediction on my behalf, but, or in my opinion, but that's just my 2 cents regarding these little annoying pop-ups we get all the time.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you. I think it, like, too many of them is just kind of gratuitous at this point. Like if you have, again, the cookie policy, the newsletter, and a chat like that, I'm probably going to leave your site without going further. That's just too much. I think there is the chat bubble way is a good idea, and I think I've seen sites do that where it's just like a little circle with a little notification, message there, like a little, red exclamation point or something saying that there's something there, and you can pop it up yourself. I do like that implementation. The other thing that I would just thought of right now actually is, why don't websites combine all of these into a chat pop-up? So essentially it's making a user use the chat right away to agree to a cookie policy. So it'll just be like 2 buttons, yes or no, in the chat, and the chat, like the bot essentially, in quote unquote, will say like, hey, can you take a look at our cookie policy and agree or disagree, and then it'll give you the options to agree and disagree. And then the next thing will be like a thing for a newsletter sign up. So you're kind of combining all of these into one pop-up and making it a more personable experience where like it's like a person is talking to you, or it's like your own scripted way of talking to any user that gets on the site. And you can really use, good language, good interaction to generate even more conversions. So, I mean, that might be something that I might work on at some point and see if I can get a little demo up, and we'll get some feedback from the audience on that, because I think that could be a really cool way of kind of implementing this new trend, like a quote unquote trend, to all the older, more annoying trends. So yeah, that's kind of what I think I might do. So the next industry trend is blockchain. This one I'm also kind of skeptical on. I agree that obviously a lot of people are talking about blockchain, and people are doing stuff with blockchain. I haven't seen too much interesting aspects of it being implemented into an actual usable product for me, with one exception. If anyone's used the Brave browser, it's actually a really good cut down version of Chromium, with a lot of good privacy settings and a lot of good UI tweaks in it that make it a really good browser. Check it out if you haven't checked it out already. But the blockchain tie-in into it is actually a revenue share crypto coin called BAT. So what it does is you can go into a creator, someone like us or someone like a YouTube channel, can actually register as a Brave creator. And what people can do is when they go on that website, they can actually donate BAT coins to them automatically. They can do it automatically. They can set up an automatic donation, or they can do it based on how much they want. So each person gets 20 coins for just signing up, which I think it's like a significant amount of dollars at this. I think one coin is like 50 cents or something, or 50 Canadian cents at this point. But essentially, it's just like a way of giving back to creators and being able to share with creators a little bit. And what it's in lieu of is the fact that browser has automatic ad blocking enabled, right? So any normal ads like Google ads you won't see, but in lieu of that, you can kind of give back to the creators with these BAT coins. And the way to earn BAT coins, there's another little mechanic that they've added in there, is viewing curated ads from them. So what will happen is a little pop-up will happen on your desktop screen at the bottom right, saying that there's an ad that's been curated for you from the Bat browser, and it's your choice to click on it, and then you can view that ad, and by viewing that ad, you get a little bit of a Bat coin. And with those Bat coins, again, you can give back revenue sharing to other creators. So it's kind of like an interesting way of doing this strange revenue sharing thing and using crypto and blockchain all in one. I don't know if it's going to take off, to be honest. I'm not 100% certain on that for sure. I think it's one of the most public ways that it's that something is gaining momentum for blockchain, in my opinion, but I don't know if it's enough to say that it's an industry trend in 2019. With that, the next one, and I haven't actually done too much research on this, but it's something called Motion UI. So Motion UI is essentially a framework or a library that gives you access to a lot of different animation classes, a lot of CSS animations, easy ways to implement CSS animations. And what people are saying with Motion UI it's not only the fact that Motion UI is trending, the framework, but also animations in websites telling a story are trending. So being like going through a website and seeing stuff pop in or fade out and like slide in depending on what's going on the website and what kind of story the creator is trying to tell. That's what's kind of been the trend of 2019. And I have seen that quite often. A lot of big websites will do stuff like that. Like I think the OnePlus website that I just went to, the OnePlus One phone manufacturer website did that. I think Apple does it now. I think Google has some websites that do like the pop-in animations that kind of give more background or more interest in a story that's being told during a scrolling effect or something like that. So I think this one is an industry trend of 2019. I don't know how long it's going to stick around for. I don't know if it's going to be in a forever industry trend. And it's definitely not something I'm very good at. Like I have done some animation work on websites, but I'm not the greatest at knowing, like I'm not a UX developer, so I don't know exactly where to put an animation. But I am trying to figure that out. That is something I'm actively working on because I think there is some value in it. As long as the animation is not directly impacting a person's experience, like negatively impacting a person's experience, like slowing them down from accessing certain information on the site, I think that's when an animation can get in the way. But if it's an animation that's showing like where something's been updated or where you're going in the website or where you're going in the experience, I think that's a good way of showing it. Like if you're moving forward in an experience, a swipe left to right sounds like something that would make sense. That's kind of what I see with the Motion UI part of the industry trends. So next thing is voice search integration. And this one's interesting to me actually, because I didn't even think of this until I started reading all these articles about industry trends. So voice search integration kind of makes sense if you think about it. With virtual assistants becoming more commonplace, like Google Home, Amazon Echo, and stuff like that, a lot of people are getting used to using their voice to control certain digital aspects of their lives. So this is now carrying over to websites. So websites can now use things like Web Speech API, and there's a lot of other libraries and frameworks that have voice search integrated into them, where you can program it into your website, where someone can actually do a command with their voice and access certain components of your website with that. I think this is a big one. I think this one will go further than most of the other ones, because not only is it kind of like a thing that people are doing more often, like using voice assistants and using AI assistants. It's also a great accessibility feature for someone that's hard of seeing, and to provide a voice integration for them to be able to read your site or read some options or read the nav bar, and then show you different, being able to actually control the site with their voice without them having to use a third-party application. I think that's a big step in towards accessibility inside of a website. With that, there's also API first design. So that's another industry trend, and I kind of also agree with this. So API first design is when you kind of look at what you'll be pulling into the website. So what information you'll be pulling in, like what social feeds, what content feeds, what news feeds you're going to be pulling into your website, and going from there to design your website knowing what information is going to be displayed. So instead of laying out your website and then being like, okay, what APIs do I use? You do a reverse way of doing this, and I kind of agree with this. I've done an article on Medium that is about controlling a website or creating a responsive website with JSON. So using JSON to create that website, and that's essentially what an API will usually return to you is JSON. And I think it's a really smart way of thinking about it. So if you take a look at any sort of large news-driven websites or information-driven websites, they're usually getting stuff from an API, whether it be like a third-party API or their own API from their own servers. They're getting a set of information. So they're getting like a news title, date, like stuff, description, stuff like that. And with knowing what they get from their API, it's a lot easier to start laying stuff out on like doing the design of the website, knowing what is going to come from the API that you're doing. So it's a smart way of thinking. I think it's a good little tweak to your design process. I definitely do it now, so I think it's a decent industry trend. Next thing, GraphQL is replacing REST APIs. So GraphQL is a similar thing. It's an API framework to allow people to get content from a server that they need, and not necessarily all the content, right? So if they only need name and date from an author's database listing, they can request only name and date, and this provides a much higher performance to a regular REST API, which usually you'll just either have to make a very custom API call for a name and date, or you'll have to make an API call with all of the author's information, and when you return that, you'll have name, date, when it was created, how many things does the author have. You have a lot of information that you don't need, so you're gonna be parsing that information out and only using the ones you need. It's a waste of a call. It's a waste of network traffic. So GraphQL fully makes sense to me. I personally don't have a ton of experience with it. I will be taking a look at it in the future. I don't have it like right now on my docket because it's not something that I heavily need, because again, the databases that I deal with are not in the millions or the hundreds of thousands. They're like, the maximum I have is a couple thousand lines, so it's not a huge deal to me to be able to have to return that or to deal with parsing that information. Once I start dealing with much larger databases, I will 100% look at GraphQL, because I know just based on how it works, it's going to be a higher performance. So the other thing, and the other industry trend that I have noticed or I have seen in these articles is serverless applications. So what this means is that it allows you to create API calls or API backend stuff, like a Node API backend, without actually having to spin up a Node server. So you can use a service to then just put like Node applet code that will return any sort of information that you need. And you'll still have to write Node code, Node.js code. So you still have to know how to do all that. The only thing you don't have to do is manage a server in the backend, because you'll just be writing this code, and the serverless API will manage the actual server for you, and it'll just give you an endpoint, and you'll be able to access that endpoint. I think this is a really good step for people that aren't familiar with the backend development. I think this would have been a very smart idea actually for me when I was first getting into backend development. It would have been a good first step to quickly build out the HTML, the things website, instead of having to learn how to create a Docker container, manage an entire Node.js server and stuff like that. I could have just put a couple of authentication applets onto a serverless distribution, a couple of other information returns onto there, and then I would have been good to go. I wouldn't have had to learn all of the stuff that goes behind creating a Node server. Not that I'm upset about learning that, but it was a long spin up process for me, because I'm not a DevOps kind of guy. I can code the actual Node.js stuff, no problem. It's just spinning up a development, like an actual server, is something that actually took me quite a bit of time and a lot of headache. As Matt knows, we've talked about that quite often. I'm not a DevOps guy. I don't want to be. I'm definitely a code. I can do back-end code, I can do front-end code, but I do not want to deal with servers. That's kind of where I'm at. So yeah, I could see serverless applications being a big thing. The only thing I would like to caution is I think once an application reaches a certain maturity level, it will still have to migrate anyway to a full server. So I don't know. It might be kind of a needless middle step, or if you have an application that's small enough that you know won't grow to a certain point, maybe it is a final step for you. But I think for most people, they will have to kind of migrate from a serverless to a server at some point. It just might be a good way to get into your app as fast as possible. And then the last one here, the last industry trend that I've seen is VR/AR. Again, this is not something I have a lot of experience with. I have looked into it a few times for future projects. And I think it could be really cool for a website to be able to have an AR component. Like, it's really interesting to me that a website could kind of show contextual overlays based on what website you're on onto the real world where you're at. So if you have a website that reviews restaurants, let's say, and you're in front of like a block of 5 restaurants, you go to that website, activate the AR augmented reality component of that application, and it will then detect which restaurant you're at visually and overlay information about that restaurant, like what its reviews are, what its like menu is and stuff like that. And you can kind of interact with it as you go. I think that kind of interaction is definitely very much a future trend. I think that will happen even with websites. Like I know applications are kind of starting to do that with Google Lens and stuff like that, but I think even websites will start to really utilize the power of VR and AR. And there's already like standards being made for web standards. I think XR is one of the standards for VR/AR on the web. But essentially, yes, I think that this is a trend. I don't know if it's a 2019 trend, but I think it's a future trend. That's my opinion with the VR AR. So that's about it for the current industry trends that I've seen kind of from those websites and gathered them, the curated list. I think we'll move on to the next segment here.
I had one quick question. That's
yeah,
right.
Of course.
I was going to ask when you were talking about the graph. So you were saying that the GraphQL is replacing the REST APIs. Now, this might be a dumb question, but I don't really touch this stuff much. I mostly do the UI stuff, as well as the server stuff that you hate so much. So I guess my question is you're saying you're not using this, and I find that like you're not planning right now on using GraphQL. And I find that when I'm not using something, so for example, like there's been a lot of changes to JavaScript since I've used it in depth, used it a lot more than controlling some animations with the different ES versions. And as a result, like there's a lot of things where I'll see people do that and be like, oh, that's incorrect syntax or something. But then I realize like, oh, it's actually part of the new ES. So my question kind of is, and this isn't specific to the GraphQL thing, but it raises the question of, especially if you're not using something like you aren't, what is the best place or best news source, I guess, to keep up with stuff like this, especially when it's so like hyper, I don't want to say hypersensitive, but it's like very specific and it's very technical. You know what I mean? It's not like mainstream news.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have like a single answer for you on that one. What I will say is I do, and not to like pump our own horns, but I do listen to a lot of podcasts, web development podcasts like Syntax. They talk a lot about industry stuff, and I also kind of read like Reddit's our web dev. People talk about the latest stuff on there all the time. I sometimes go down rabbit holes where I'll just like see one thing and then I'll kind of search for more of that technology and then I'll find more stuff. So I think it's really good to be in that industry bubble. The other thing is people go to talks, people give talks. We like as HTML, the things will also have a lot of information about industry trends or industry evolutions, like maybe not exactly GraphQL, but other stuff like Vue.js, right? Like we did a lot of content on Vue.js. So people listen to us and that's how they get that information. People listen to Syntax, they get other information. So it's like essentially what I do is I'm with a lot, like I'm listening and reading a lot of different sources that are constantly updating. So Reddit is constantly updating, like you only see the top, like the top of the day usually on there. So I get the latest news for that day almost every day. I'll check it at least once or twice a day. The R web dev subreddit. So that gives me a lot of really cool, like, new information that comes up, and then people usually talk about it in the comments. And in those comments, sometimes people will bring up other technologies, and I'll go in a deep dive on those technologies. So it's essentially just being willing to go in and look at a lot of different sources, listen to a lot of different sources on different subjects, and then follow up with research on the stuff that you hear. That's kind of, or read. So that's kind of what I do for it. And again, this is a very short list of technologies. There's hundreds and thousands of different technologies that I don't know and I don't cover, that I'm sure are extremely popular and stuff like that at this point. So it's not, my method of doing this might not be the best method. There might be better methods out there that people can somehow stay on top of everything, but I don't think it's possible to stay on top of everything. I think it's one of those things like GraphQL. I do a lot of API work for contracts. Therefore, I do a lot of research into APIs, and therefore I get a little bit of like tidbits of different technologies that are out there. Like if someone asks a question on Stack Overflow about an API call, someone might mention GraphQL on there, and I'll be like, oh, what's GraphQL? And then I'll Google GraphQL. So it's one of those things that, depending on the work that you're doing, like you did you were doing Tailwinds. Remember last week, I didn't know anything about Tailwinds, and you had to explain it to me because I don't do CSS framework stuff. So it's essentially just being in that circle of what you're doing currently. So the more you're doing, the more that circle expands. But that's essentially it, I think.
Okay, cool.
All right, so moving on to segment 2. Our predictions. So again, in this segment, it's going to be more laying out what we think is going to happen. It's not too long of a segment, so we're just going to get right into it. So I've said this before, my opinion, Vue.js will continue to increase in usage among frameworks, and maybe not in 2019, but I think it will eventually overtake Angular and React. And the reasoning for that is Vue.js is kind of, I feel I've used React now, and I've helped other people with React, and I can see almost every part of React in Vue.js, and Vue.js does it easier to understand and better implemented. And I haven't met many people that disagree with me. The people that disagree that Vue.js, or that don't disagree but that don't use Vue.js currently, are usually not using it because it's not the industry standard yet. Like, it's not like a widely used framework as React is. I think it is becoming that, but I think there isn't really too much to knock about Vue.js, and the fact that it's developing so rapidly and kind of overtaking React in its feature set and the way it's being developed, how efficient everything is. We're already getting Vue.js 3.0. I think it's upcoming really soon with a lot of really awesome features. My thing is that React is a little bit more complicated to understand and to get started with than Vue.js, and therefore Vue.js will overtake it. That's how I see it. Like, I don't think it's in my opinion, it's not like a if this happens, it's a when this happens. That's where I see Vue.js going. Next is performance will once again start impacting development decisions, which will raise the use of pure vanilla JS and minimal libraries. So when someone builds a application now, a lot of it has to do with the speed at which they build it, and because of the fact that usually people are on very extreme time constraints, they're usually trying to use already made code as much as they can and use frameworks that help them with development as much as they can, like Vue.js, like Bootstrap, like any framework that essentially accelerates your development. The problem with that is even though the frameworks are very well optimized, like these frameworks are really, really good, and I have no qualms about them, it's still not as fast as using a simple Vue.js, like a simple JavaScript implementation. So just native JavaScript. And I think that will start to become important. The emerging, technology has gotten a lot faster, and speed has gotten a little bit less important, as I've noticed. Like, people do put a lot of content on their sites nowadays, and they're not as concerned with how fast they load. But I think that's kind of twisting. I think people are going back to the phase where we want this to be as fast as possible. We want it to be faster than our competitor. We want people to, if they go to this site, for it to perform the same actions as our competitor, but twice as fast. And that will be the differentiator between them and the competitor. And I think for that, they will be hiring developers that have a very good understanding of pure JavaScript, because that's one way where people can, increase the speed of loading, the speed of actions and stuff like that.
Another thing too is like when it comes to performance, and like, I mean, it's just sort of a side effect of this, I guess, but it's like the fact that a lot of developers don't even know what their build process is doing or what plugins are working in the background. Like, sometimes people will be aware of the plugins that they're installing. Other times they'll just be copying and pasting, NPM scripts, let's say, or NPM commands, not even realizing they're installing plugins, because maybe this, particular developer is just specifically using they're specifically used to working in Tailwind, or they're specifically used to working in something. And so they don't really understand what's happening in the build process and that type of thing. And I feel like the fact that they don't know what's going on means that it's rather complex. And honestly, when I use NPM and that type of thing, a lot of the time you go into like the node modules file, and sure, if I run an NPM install Tailwind, obviously I'm Tailwind heavy because I'm big into it right now, but NPM install Tailwind, whatever the command is, I know that inside of my node modules, there's going to be a Tailwind CSS folder in there. And I understand that I'm installing, Tailwind CSS, and I understand I need to build it. But there's a lot of node modules in there that I don't understand what's in there. Like, I don't understand a lot of those things. And I think that this is really, it's almost like the Windows problem, where Windows is like, has so many layers that, every one of us could build the identical PC, and each one of us could have different problems at the same time, because there's so many layers to Windows, and there's so many layers to this. Building our websites are becoming the same thing. There's so many layers to, and I'm not blaming NPM. Like, NPM is a great way to install plugins and that type of thing. What I'm saying is that these build processes are getting very large, and for very little reason. Oftentimes I'll find people installing like a Flexbox plugin. Just use Flexbox if you need to use Flexbox for one page. Just use a little bit of CSS if you need to highlight the text, or if you need to wrap this in a box or something. Like, just use a little bit of CSS. But people are like, oh no, I got to look up like box in plugins, or like I need to like Google like how do I do a navbar in Node or something. Instead of just using more of a basic structure, we're bloating up the process in which we build things in, and these plugins are built for generalized apps. So as a result, there's bloat in there because you, as a developer, chances are, I should say, not using all of the features of that plugin that you're using. And so it's one of those things that just really sucks, where it's like what am I like? I've been with people where I've said like, hey, I'm having trouble with, setting up your environment. Like, let's say I go to contribute on a project, like, hey, I'm having trouble setting up your environment, and they won't even know what that error is or even how to help, because they're not aware. Like, they just set up the environment probably from a guide, and they're unaware of what they're doing. They don't know where all the files are. They don't know where all the plugins are. And like I said, we're guilty of it as well when doing npm install and that type of thing. But at least I know that npm install isn't doing a plugin. I think there's a fair amount of people, and I don't have numbers, in my opinion, that there's a lot of developers out there that learn how to use a certain framework or a certain plugin, and they don't know how the install process works at all, and they don't know what's going on in the back end, and they don't realize that there's probably thousands of lines of crap that there's not crap, but it's stuff they're not using, so it's crap for their project that's just in the project and being loaded for no reason. Or massive photos, stuff like that. I think that a lot of the performance is being hurt or injured by that type of mentality and that type of workflow.
Yeah, and I'll actually even add to that. These like plugins that you're downloading are also have their own dependencies that download even more plugins. So when you download an npm plugin, like you said, in that npm node modules folder, all of a sudden you'll see like 50 different plugins in there but you only download one. What it does is it goes into its own plugin, and it'll download its dependencies. And then it'll go into that plugin's dependencies, and that'll download its dependencies. So it's like an infinite tree, not an infinite tree, but it's a tree of dependencies being installed on one plugin. So you might want a slider on your website, and that slider might need a JavaScript plugin for, moving stuff from left to right, and it also might need a JavaScript plugin for changing images on the fly or something like that. So it'll have that, and those JavaScript image changing plugins might need a file changing plugin or something, whatever. It just keeps going and going and going, and you're installing all these plugins. So the concern is, yes, with speed, but the even bigger concern, and something that I've seen actually brought up quite often now, is the security aspect of it. So you can see when you install a plugin on NPM, after it installs, it shows how many dependencies have serious, critical, minimal or whatever security concerns. And most people are running their applications, and we're included in this, with critical security concerns on our plugins. This, I think, will bite us in the ass. Don't quote me on it, but you can quote me on it. I don't know.
Well, it's a house. It's your opinion, but it's also a house of cards. It's, if you don't understand, like, you might be using 150 plugins. All it takes is one plugin that has some random thing that stores something in plain text that you were unaware of because you used their like secure keyword. So you thought it was secure, and then it wasn't. It was storing it in plain text. Boom, you're gone.
So essentially, yeah, I fully agree that this is something that might crumble, like you said, like a house of cards. I think that at some point, malicious attackers will figure out how to attack many, many, many different node modules at the same time, and attack it just like people would attack WordPress. And many, many, like hundreds of people's or thousands or millions of people's sites will go down because one of their, hundreds of dependencies went down, and that's it. Actually, another thing that happened recently was NPM is kind of open source, and anyone can add or take away from it at any time they want. So if someone has a critical plugin that, thousands and thousands of other plugins use as a dependency, and they decide, hey, you know what? I don't want to keep this out there anymore. I don't want this to be open source. And they take it off NPM, all of those applications with those dependencies will crumble. And it's happened before. It will probably happen again. It's one of those things that, like, it's just inevitable. I'm surprised it hasn't happened more often. I think it's only happened once or twice, which is kind of crazy to me. Maybe the developer community is better than we think. Like, we're just like a more intact community, and we don't want to screw each other over, and that's the reason. But I'm sure that if we just keep doing this blind plugin installation, it will continue to kind of get worse and worse as the years go on. So good call out, Matt, on that one. The next little, this is a small prediction. I think dark mode will become more and more prevalent on sites. So being able to switch between a light and a dark theme. People have started to realize how blue light affects their eyes before sleep. And I think people have started to take into account the fact that AMOLED screens on cell phones get better battery life with a dark, like a very black background. So I think sites, like larger sites, will start implementing this more and more often. I think Google, like the new Android operating system, will have a dark mode across the entire system. So like that's already kind of a trend that I can see happening. And then the last kind of prediction that I have here is with Edge moving to Chromium, and the fact that Edge was the factor of like holding up a lot of ES6 Plus features, even though Edge was a lot better than the Internet Explorer installations, but it still wasn't being updated the same way that other browsers were being updated. Edge was being updated in major feature updates to Windows, so it couldn't get rapid updates. So we would have to wait a long time for Edge to be updated. Now that it's going to be on Chromium, Chromium will update quicker. The back end of Chromium, and therefore we will probably be able to get those ES6 or whatever ES is out there in the future out faster. So it's an interesting thought. I think I obviously Safari still is the kind of iffy conclusion here. They were usually better at implementing features than Internet Explorer, but I feel like lately they've been like the worst of all the other browsers. So compared to Firewalks, even like regular Edge, I think Safari was still bad. So maybe that's what's going to hold that part up. But I'm hoping that features will be able to be built into JavaScript faster. And with that, actually, the last one here, just real quick, is that I think elitism, like developer elitism, and not helping the culture of like, oh, I know this, but I'm not going to help you, is going to start to get looked down upon. As we can see, a lot of a lot of developers, if you start talking to other developer circles, are starting to look down on the Stack Overflow elitism, and the Stack Overflow, like, oh, this has been answered before in like in a side question to this question to that question. You don't need to ask it again. Those kinds of like responses are getting less and less liked in the developer community, and I think more of a teaching culture. So people just teach each other different, like all the different techniques that they use, is what's starting to become more trendy. And I think that trend it's a positive trend that I hope continues to keep going. With that, I think we'll go on to web news, unless Matt has any other comments on industry trends or anything like that.
No, I think that's covered rather well, and I think I think this web news is going to spark a pretty lengthy conversation. So let's kind of jump right into it here. So the title is "Are We Too Focused on Conversions?" And this goes back to one of those other points I was talking about earlier in the show. I think it was segment number 1, and I'll kind of go through a little bit of a blurb here, like normal, and then I'll sort of ask the question and get the conversation started. So converting an onlooker to a paying customer is the goal of any business. Digital products and websites are often very trackable, so they can trace exactly what processes convert the most users to paying customers, whether it be, little chat things popping up, whether it be newsletter things popping up, et cetera, all like a lot of the users' usage stuff can be tracked. Where's their mouse going? How long are they on the website? What's the bounce? Where were they from generally, et cetera, within a certain amount of privacy laws, of course, but, it's a lot more trackable than, say, someone walking around on the street. So oftentimes viral projects, which albeit are normally random and difficult to replicate, get a ton of conversions, but oftentimes these viral projects don't actually have a lot of these conversion tropes of modern websites. They don't often have, a big pop-up for their newsletter and that sort of thing. So common conversion techniques, as I've touched on already, include things like pop-ups for newsletter signups, chat pop-ups, as we've talked about earlier, an account sign-up requests, as well as a notification. Of course, the notifications will come in there, allow or, disallow my notifications, let me send you notifications. So my question is, and I also have a couple other little points to mark down after, is are projects that focus on converting techniques missing the point of creating a good product? I kind of think that the answer to that is yes, and I kind of think it's one of those things of, quote unquote, if they build it, it will come, or if you build it, they will come kind of thing. Obviously, because there's so much just stuff out there now, not necessarily people are going to start showing up without marketing, but in general, if it's a good product, the people that you do attract, and assuming it is solving a problem that's needed, if it's a good product, will keep at least a few loyal customers. And one thing I do want to say just before we kind of jump into this is that marketing is obviously important, but these little, I don't know if this is too strong of a word, but I'll call these little schemes. So these little schemes, like the pop-ups and that kind of thing, that convert a bunch of people, are they actually, and I don't have numbers, are they actually costing the company more by turning away those users that are interested but annoyed at the fact that they had to like close 3 or 4 pop-ups before actually looking at the website? And to these users, especially people who are tech savvy or just they're savvy in the particular market, they know that these are obvious sales tactics and they might just get really sick of it. They just want to see the pricing chart or the feature chart. They don't need to be told to allow notifications and every other thing in the world. So I'll kind of pass it to Mike to try to give his 2 cents on this.
So, okay. I see this as coming from a couple different sides. Let's say you're marketing to the general public that's not tech savvy and that's not privy to a bunch of different marketing factors and doesn't understand how marketing works. They just kind of want a product for X purpose, nothing to do with technology. Maybe it's like a recipe website. They just want a bunch of recipes every week, and that's what they're there for. They're looking for recipes. I think to them, those pop-ups might be kind of a reminder. So if they're of the knowledge, like if they're just there to get recipes, they're looking for recipes and they like those recipes, and then like a minute after they're on the site, a pop-up shows up. Hey, we see that you're on our website for an extended period of time. We actually do a weekly newsletter. Do you want to sign up and we'll send you recipes every week? And then that's what they're there for. they might put in their email, and that might be a constructive user that they're getting, a user that will, generate leads, that will generate income for them, because that's what they're there for. Now, on the flip side of that, if you're targeting someone that's privy to marketing techniques and privy to development techniques, like a developer, like let's talk about HTML other things for a second. If we target developers and we try to use these quote unquote schemes, as you say, they will not fly. I'm almost 100% sure they will not fly. Yes, we might get some people to sign up or whatever, but they're not the people that we want to be following us. They're not the quality user that we want to like interact with, that we, the whole point of what we do this for. Like, we want people that know about this kind of technology, that, like, I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where I think if you know about it, it's not going to be effective. If you're someone that's just a general public user, I think it is an effective strategy. And I don't think the fact that it's been working for so long is a testament to that. Like, it's tough to sit on quote unquote like high horse or the mountain and be like, oh, all these people are doing it wrong. When there has to be some reason that they're doing like these. There's some multi-million dollar organizations that are using these different techniques to convert people. So they have to be of some use. Now, having said that, obviously, for me personally, when I go to a website and they attack me with a bunch of different pop-ups, I'm not going to be the customer for them. Maybe they're okay with that. Maybe they don't want people that question their tactics, and that's not who's going to be that. Regardless of that, that's not who's going to be buying their products. Like, they want the people that are there for the specific purpose of getting the content from them, and they will be very happy to get their weekly newsletter or whatever. And that makes sense to me. I don't know, like that's kind of where I'm coming from.
The thing, that's a really good point, because it is different market segments for sure. Like, I agree that the developers are certainly not going to be as receptive to like using pop-ups and that sort of thing, for sure. But there's one other thing that I should mention too, is that I was watching a YouTube video a long time ago. I can't remember who it was by, but this guy was saying that, he doesn't really like the fact that people are using, these tactics to get people. But he said, like, obviously I want conversion. So one of the things that he was doing was sort of a more in-depth study on his particular website or web app. And what it was he was finding that if somebody was, either like, again, it's been a long time since I've seen the videos, so I might be like describing the wrong situation, but it was something like, if the user does a certain thing in a form, so it's like they were filling out something and it looked like they got stuck, like it was like they half filled it out and they left it, or they did something in the form and it was like incomplete, he would then kind of hit them with a chat window thing. And I mean, that's a little less intrusive and that's a little more interesting, I suppose, because it's like, hey, hey, it looks like you're stuck on this. Can we offer any assistance? Which is nice. However, and maybe this is more old-fashioned, and maybe this is why we're not necessarily marketers, is, to me, if the product is good enough, the UX is good enough, the UI is thought out, and the product is solving a problem that truly needs to be solved, do we really need to get into that nitty-gritty? Or is that really showing more desperation than not? Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing conversion stuff like this, like, I'm sure there's nothing legally wrong, as far as I'm aware, with doing the pop-ups, that type of thing. And if it's converting a lot of people over to your site, then that's great. Hooray. Like, you're getting revenue, of course. And I would probably do the same thing given that opportunity. And maybe we will in the future. Who knows? But as you said, with developers, it's probably not going to stick. But I'm just wondering how much of a push do you need to give the customers? Like, if you think about it, to me, for example, if you were to take it into something that everybody does. So let's say everyone goes to the supermarket, like the food store in real life. So it's a physical presence. You're going to a physical store, and I understand some people order in, but just hypothetically, you're going to the store, and you don't have a manager or a salesperson constantly there to bother you. You may have a couple people set up with little booths, then they have samples of their latest thing that they got in, the new steaks or something, and so they try to sell you that, and they might offer it to you. Sometimes they just stand there with a little sign and let you come into them, but there's no one really there corralling you. There's a flyer that gets sent out every week or whatever it is, and you can, get those if you do get those, and you can read them, and you can even read them online if you'd prefer, and then you can kind of go to the store with a shopping list and go through it. there's nobody there at the door being like, hey, you should really sign up for this newsletter. Hey, would you like a shopping assistant? Hey, would you like a cart? Hey, it's like, okay, thank you. I need, I'm here because my problem is I don't have food in the house. So I need to get food in the house. This place was, at such and such a location. It was close to me. It has such and such a price point. I'm going to go buy it. And they would do that without the push. And so my question is are we creating, I guess my question is are we creating worse projects and are we creating worse products? Saying that separated sounded weird. Products. Are we creating worse products because we're trying to squeeze the little bit of need from every person, if that makes sense? It's like trying to sell a meal to a person that's full, if you will. Like you're like, oh, you could use some dessert, and then some people will be like, yeah, okay, but they wouldn't have done that on their own. So you're kind of like pushing those people, but like, shouldn't most of your customers be from people that are like, holy God, like I need a podcast service or I need a sales service. I don't need to be corralled into this. I need a sales service. I need it now. This is a sales service. I'm okay with the price. I'm going for it. I know I need an e-commerce solution. I'm going for the e-commerce solution. And I'm just curious as to whether these little things are they are technically the evolution of marketing, but if you have a truly good product, do you need to do these little things, these little schemes? Do you need it?
So let me pose a question to you. When you're watching a YouTube video,
yeah,
and you've watched a good chunk of it, and then at the end they say, hey, if you can give a like or subscribe, has that ever affected you to actually give them a like or subscribe?
I will say that I have forgotten to subscribe before, and then that has reminded me.
Yeah. So that I think is the same principle that this newsletter sign up or notification sign up, that I believe that's the same principle, because for me, and call me a sheep or whatever, I forget to like and subscribe. And then if someone says it in a video, and I've liked that video up to that point, I will go do it usually, because they've reminded me. And I have read and listened to a lot of YouTubers talk about YouTube in general on how it works. And they say that if they don't say that, they see a very significant drop in interaction with their video. Same with comment. Don't forget to comment. Like, saying those things to people, it seems to work. Like, it seems that as much as we want to say, like, yeah, we want all those like ideal people that will just do it regardless of the fact that if we remind them, I just don't think there's a lot of those people out there. And if you want to reach the larger audience, and this could be, you could argue against this saying like, maybe I don't want to reach a larger audience. Maybe I'm a niche product and I only want the more dedicated people that won't need to be reminded, which is fair. That could work in some specific use cases. But I think in general, people do need the reminder. Like, I'm not one of those people that will sign up for a company newsletter, but I know a lot of people that would. And same with, like, I'm sure there's a lot of people that wouldn't subscribe to a video because someone tells them to subscribe, but I'm one of those people that would. You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of like you're playing to different people's interests, and a lot of people will be okay with the fact that they had a pop-up reminding them that they can subscribe. One of those things, like a thing for me, is that I don't like to receive a lot of stuff at once. If I receive one pop-up after like a minute of being on the site, a minute being that, like, that's a pretty long attention span that I've had on that site. Like, people's attention spans are extremely short. So if you've been there for more than a minute, I think that's enough time to be like, okay, just, I can close out this pop-up box because I'm still enjoying being on your site or whatever. Like, it's just one of those, like, and it's actually the same thing with YouTube videos. I don't like it when people tell me to subscribe before I start, like at the start of a video. I like it at the end of a video. And I appreciate that more because I've already had time to like judge the video and notice how good it is or how bad it is, and make my decision on if I were going to do that or not. So I think it's the implementation that matters, not the fact that people are doing it. I don't like it when a lot of stuff pops up at once. So I don't like we were saying before, chat pop-up, account sign-up request, and a pop-up for newsletter. If all those three things pop up at once, I'm gone. And I'm sure that applies to many people because I'm not closing 3 different pop-ups to stay on your site unless it's like something super critical to my like well-being or something like that. So
you see what I'm saying with that though? Like, that's a really good point you just said right there. If it's critical to your well-being, which maybe it shouldn't be that serious necessarily, but it should be critical to your need or your want at that moment. And if you're truly trying to get that information, you might be interested in that website without those pop-ups. Now, I do agree with you though about the YouTube thing. But I will say that the YouTube thing, like please like, comment, and subscribe, is something that we do, right? We do something similar at the end of the show, please leave a comment, that type of thing. But to me, it's more of like a piece of the show. It's like there's a little bit of a self-plug in there, and that's sort of expected at this point. It would be different if on YouTube they also like had a little pop-up saying like, hey, how are you enjoying the video? Like if it was like, interrupting the video. Hey, how are you enjoying the video? How are you enjoying this? Or like, hey, we have a newsletter. Like they have the join thing where you can join channels now and you can sort of like subscribe like you would on Twitch, where you can like pay a monthly like a contribution or whatever right on YouTube. That isn't really thrown in anyone's face, I find. And people are doing it, so it's clearly working. And I actually haven't heard anyone mention it in their videos. I don't watch I don't watch a copious amount of different YouTubers, so maybe a lot do it. But the thing is like I would also say that something like Amazon, for example, if you're not signed into Amazon and you don't have an Amazon account and you go to Amazon.ca or Amazon.com, I would say that Amazon doesn't bother you as much, or at least not in my experience, as much as say like a random blog does, whereas they do have the acceptable, or at least in my opinion, acceptable sort of YouTube thing where they say, hey, you can sign up for Amazon right now. You can, sign up for a free account. I would say that sort of marketing is still in your face enough that I'm going to be reminded. At the same time, I may act and I may not. Whereas these blogs are just going absolutely crazy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know. To me, I think you're right though. Like I think it's probably the implementation. It's not necessarily if it's taking away from your content is probably what we're getting at. If it's taking away from what the content is, that's no good.
I think, okay, so one thing that I'll completely agree with you on is the fact that I think there's a better way to do it for blogs and stuff like that. I think a pop-up isn't the best way. I think the better way to do it, I don't know the better way to do it, but I think I would try a bunch of different ways before I settled on a pop-up. One of those ways might be more of a integrated into content in a blog article, ask people to sign up for a newsletter. I think that's more of a less in-your-face pop-up content blocking kind of way to do it, and more of a, like you said, a YouTube approach where it's just kind of a quick reminder. So people are already reading your content, they're going to read through that section where it says sign up for a subscription, or they can just skip over it if they want. It's not blocking their view. So I think you're right in the sense that maybe the pop-up is a little bit obnoxious. People use it because it works, or people use it because it's easy to implement. But I do believe that there are better ways to do it, and we haven't settled on one like the best way yet. And it would be really interesting to see where that goes in the future. Speaking of industry trends kind of thing, I wonder how conversions will be impacted in the future. I think you're like the combination of creating a really good product and just reminding the user how to support that really good product are the two things that like would meld well together. Like, not to, again, promote ourselves, but when we do we're doing a podcast, to be able to promote that podcast, just a reminder for like the Patreon or like the Twitter or whatever, that's enough for us. Like, I don't want people to go to our website and have a pop-up in their face saying, hey, can you support us on Patreon or whatever? No, just us saying it once or twice is, I think, enough. And I hope that it's not too invasive in people's ears. Stuff like that. So I agree with you, but it's a really interesting conversation, I think, a conversation piece. And I would really like to do like research on it in the future. If I could have one thing that I could go back to school for, it would be probably some of this data analytics stuff. Because we did a little bit of data mining, but I didn't like analyze too much data. And I think having been in the industry for a little bit now, I can go back and I would do like a research project on all of these kind of techniques and interview different site owners and see what they say. Like, it's an interesting concept, I think.
And like to kind of build off of that too, is it's sort of like, we're complaining from the perspective of somebody who's like really into the industry, and obviously somebody who's tech savvy and obviously uses tech a lot as well. So maybe these websites need to do this to survive. And I don't want to like step on anyone's toes. I don't want to like make fun of somebody or beat them up for making a living. Of course not. Like if we saw massive improvement in hats conversion by doing 1 million pop-ups, that website's getting 1 million pop-ups. That's just the way it's going to be. The fact of the matter is the content does still need to be good. You can't have like garbage content just for people to sit in front of pop-ups. That doesn't make any sense. But I will say that at least my current mentality is, especially with Hat, is that I would prefer, like, I'm going to add ads to the website and that type of thing. Like, that is something that's going to happen because we want to make money. Of course, let's just be serious with it. But at the same time, I don't want there to be 1,000,001 pop-ups. I don't want there to be 1,000,001 things that like constantly annoy the user. One of the things I'll see on blogs is I'll be looking up, something very specific or a guide or something. And I'll come to the site. It'll ask me about notifications. I'll say no. Then it'll ask me about a newsletter. I'll say no. Then a cookie pop-up shows up and it'll do you want to opt in or like whatever. So you say, okay, yes, it's fine. You have cookies. And then and then all of a sudden an ad like loads in, the article tries to load in, and then I hear a bunch of noise because a video ad starts playing. And then I'll be like, oh, Jesus. So I'll mute that. Then as I start scrolling down, that video player that was at the top becomes like a video, like a screen or whatever, and it becomes like a floating video on my bottom right, and it follows me as I scroll down, and it's like this ad playing. It's like, what is going on here? Like, how many ads are we, like, you know what I mean? I'm sitting through all of your conversion thing, and then you're converting me so that I see ads, but like, look at all the stuff I just clicked. Like, I just want to read this freaking guide. Like, what are you guys doing to me? See, I think that personally, again, if it's creating you a bunch of conversions, I mean, power to you, right? But at the same time, it's like, what are you guys doing? Like, that's pretty bad UX. Like, if you ask a UX person, like, just from a pure UX perspective, like, okay, let's make this site nice and nice and tidy for the users. Not going to be like the very first thing that they should see is 4 pop-ups and an ad that doesn't go away. Like, no one's going to say that in terms of a UX perspective. No one's going to say that. Somebody in marketing might, right? But they're not talking from the UX perspective of the thing. And so I think we're getting further. I think this may be the indicator that we're getting further from UX, but you're right. We're getting further from the UX of things because we don't know how to convert people yet. And on that note, things like discovery engines, so something like a social media thing or Medium to an extent, which has a bit of a different policy now, but Medium to an extent, those type of things are new ways to get new followers and to generate an audience, but at the same time, they are you have to stand out somehow. And so, whereas you're not necessarily, putting pop-ups and stuff like that on your posts on there, it's still one of those things where we're seeing an evolution in web content. It's like websites came out first, right, on the web for the most part. Like, in terms of the public using the web, websites were like the big thing. AOL keywords were a big thing, and it would take you to websites. Now it's like if you could be on a website, sure, or you could just go onto Twitter and see the instant views, or you could, go on to Medium and just read the read the stuff within that smaller community. There's a lot there that there's a lot to unpack, I guess is what I'm saying. Is, websites aren't going anywhere, but at the same time, websites aren't the only thing anymore. And so websites are revamping their marketing selves, if you will. And as a result, whenever somebody sees an uptick in numbers and like a higher conversion rate due to some sort of research that somebody has done, obviously people are going to jump on it because they need that little piece that they lost. They lost a little piece to social media maybe, so they need that piece back. And that's sort of where it is. And I think if you're like a big creator, and I don't really know how to get into this, if you're a creator on Twitter, I think you can get ad revenue from your videos that you post on there. And it's the same for Facebook for sure, for certain creators. Like, you can get Facebook monetization. And so, like, that's one of the things that's starting to come out now is that now, like, the monetization has rolled into the social media as well. Like, obviously there's the ads that support Twitter on Twitter, but then there's obviously now the ads that support the creators, which are supporting Twitter. And then because you're on there looking at that creator, you're looking at ads that support Twitter. So, like, it's like a double whammy kind of thing. And so I think you're right. It's going to be an interesting few years, probably a decade, or 5 to 10 years, I'd say, where we're seeing a lot of different changes. And it's just like anything else. We go too far. So I think we're kind of at that point where we've gone too far, and then we're going to have to try to like reel it back. And things like your chat bot idea, where you kind of conglomerate, is a cool idea. I like that idea. Having one pop-up that has 4 or 5 things in there, so people can interact with it. It's a little more natural. And then if they send a message to it, maybe it like alerts a support tech or something like that within the appropriate hours, or shoots off an email if it's after hours or something like that. And that makes a lot more sense to me. So
yeah, that's kind of where I stand on it too. I was actually gonna leave off with the fact that I think I want to try that one pop-up with a chat bot to tackle all the things, super unintrusive, and just try to see if that can work. But yeah, you beat me to it.
Well, yeah, like, I mean, it's a good idea, and I think it'd be something cool to even offer as an NPM plugin, which we can pull the or get popular and then pull it out of support. But I'm joking, of course, I'm not being serious. But and then make sure to sprinkle in some critical security problems in there. But yeah, like, I think that'd be a cool like NPM package or something if we ever want to do an NPM package, or NPM plugin, whatever. We've never tried that. We never tried something that's been distributed over NPM, so that'd be kind of a cool project. Maybe give that a try or something like that. I think this kind of concludes the conversation. I would like to hear from the viewers, though, if you guys wouldn't mind, shooting us a message on any of the socials or on our new Discord, as we've already said. Again, shameless self plug. Yeah, if you guys wouldn't mind, like, chatting with us and saying, if you have any sort of interest or have any sort of experience with this type of, getting conversions from a website. Maybe you have a blog that's doing well because of this type of stuff. Shoot us a message, because we're not super versed in it. We're obviously aware of what's going on, but we're not full-time marketers. So, shoot us a message and let us know what you think, what your opinion is, and what your experiences are like. But if you have unless you have any other comments, Mike, I think we should run the old conclusion.
Wrap her up.
Alrighty, well, thank you for listening, and make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. Let's put a pop-up here, right, Mike? You can also follow us on the socials, which is at HTML All the Things, which is Facebook and Instagram. You can find us on Twitter via at HTML Everything. We are on Medium. We are also on GitHub, and as I said repeatedly, we are also on Discord. And we are also on Patreon. So remember, we are on Patreon via patreon.com/HTML all the things. Check out the tiers and give that a go. And many thanks to our $3 tier patron, Sean from RabbitWorks JavaScript. You can find him at youtube.com/RabbitWorks JavaScript. And works is spelled WERKS. His link will, of course, be in the full show notes on our website. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform that you are listening to this on. And we are signing off.